Welcome to the weekly History Chaos podcast. In today's episode 1, I'll be explaining what this podcast can be about. And as you guessed it, it's going to be about history. So this is going to be random history. Throughout the episodes, I will draw random histories from a bucket, just random history subjects, and talk about them. These are pre-selected by me, and right now most of them do focus on World War II just because it's something that I'm pretty second nature in. I don't really have to think about it very much, and it's just easy for me to do. If you hit up any of my social media channels like TikTok, which I create content on, or YouTube, you can make suggestions to me, and I can add those to the bucket. And if it's anything I don't know, I'll make sure to research it. So to start this off, let's go ahead and draw our first subject. Let's see what we got here. Turning points of World War II. So, on these turning points, mainly it's going to be possible turning points. Some of the biggest ones that I can think of off the top of my head, it's going to be after Pearl Harbor got bombed. The Battle of Midway was a very big turning point because at that point, if we won or the Japanese won that battle, it would have been one way or the other in the Pacific. If we would have lost that battle and had our last carriers sunk, could we eventually have fought them? Yes, but would we have? I mean, we would have been behind. Japan would have had free reign in the Pacific. Our fleet would have been unable to combat them after that point, and we probably would have white peaced or had some kind of ceasefire between our nations. So Japan would have won, or possibly. Obviously, that's all history. Another turning point here that I can think of is Dunkirk. Not really. It's a turning point that went for the Allies. But if Dunkirk wouldn't have happened, we could not have gotten the UK soldiers out. That could have been a massive, massive loss for the Allies. And UK might have not had the manpower to even continue a war after losing so many men and things like that. Another turning point is the Battle of Stalingrad and the defense of Moscow. If first off, Stalingrad was honestly looking like a German victory. It was looking pretty close there. I did not think that, looking back in history, it seemed like the Germans could have pulled a win there, and they controlled most of the city, pushed the Soviet Union back all the way, and then when that counterattack finally came, the Germans just couldn't do anything about it. Defense of Moscow, kind of the same thing. The Soviets got pushed to a breaking point, and that counterattack was building up for so long that when it finally got let loose on the Germans, they had nothing left to combat it at that point. It was just a constant push all the way through. Obvious other turning points would be D-Day, but really after D-Day, even when D-Day happened, it was kind of already game over for Germany at that point. I mean, they were going to lose to the Soviet Union. That there wasn't much they could have done at that point anyway. Some people even ask if D-Day was even really necessary, but it is necessary because Europe would have been a red Europe without us being there. That's pretty much all I can think of on turning points. The biggest ones, probably one more. Sea Line was a big turning point. I mean, UK got really low on planes. Like, if Sea Line wouldn't have failed and they would have kept pressing it could have had drastic results for UK. So there could have been some really big changes there. Because they almost, I mean, it came down to the last planes and the last men in the UK when Operation Sea Lion was going forth. And who knows what would have happened if Germany kept it up. So that's also another turning point. Let's see what else I can draw out of here. Germany's early expansion, World War II. So a lot of people wonder why Germany could expand so fast in World War II and like how they got away with so much. And the honest truth is that there was a lot of appeasement going on. So, and a lot of it did make sense. Like, Germany wanted Austria, and at that time period, they were like, well, a lot of Austria, they speak German. They kind of made sense for Germany to take Austria back and to annex it. And it just kind of went along with everything, and everyone's like, okay, yeah, if they want that, let them have it. And there was also a little bit of feeling bad because the Treaty of Versailles in World War I really didn't side well with the Germans, and it kind of punished them heavily. So they kind of gave the Germans a little bit back. They understood. I mean, Great Depression, economies were suffering. They didn't want to anger. They were trying to appease them, and that's why they called appeasement. They were trying to settle the old grudges in a way that made sense. Another one would be Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland. Yeah, they wanted the Sudetenland was primarily German, and at the taking of that, which what was agreed upon, it was just going to be a Sudetenland. And then after that, Germany rolled in, the military and was like, "Yeah, we're taking the rest too." So that appeasement kind of went in a direction. It was really surprising too. No one thought at the time. I mean, when the UK Prime Minister at the time came back, quote me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong in the name without looking it up. But Chamberlain, I'm pretty sure when he came back, he was like, greatest peace deal of all time, greatest talk of all time. He's really bragging it up. And then Sudetenland happened, and then right after that, they were like, yeah, we'll take the rest too. And then he was like, at that point, like without that moment, ensured that Churchill would rise to power in the UK. So that happened. And from Germany's point of view, they're like, well, if we could take Austria, if we could take Czechoslovakia, what else can we take? Kind of encouraged them at that point. So they wanted Danzig from Poland. They were like, Danziger War, kind of situation. So the early expansion went along like that. You're talking 1937, 1938. And then when it came to 1939, they wanted Danzig from Poland. They really didn't think that the Allies would form. They didn't think a war was going to break out over Danzig, Poland. They thought that, the war with Poland would happen and the Allies would just let them do it pretty much. They did not expect a war to break out there. So that's also kind of getting a little further into the war, but early expansions kind of explains what happened. And then quickly, Germany, after the war started, Poland, Netherlands, Belgium, France, then they went Denmark, Norway. They really pressed on, which, once it became a world war and they were like, yeah, let's just take it all, Either way, they were going big or going home kind of situation. But it's interesting to look back and think that they got away with so much of that time. That's how scared people were of a world war because of the casualty rates and the loss rates from World War One. But honestly, it's super off topic. But World War One, you look at losses, but a lot of losses were like also from like sickness, disease, malnutrition, the environment. It wasn't like literally like losses from like getting shot or anything like that. It was just other factors that kind of played in. I do plan on keeping these pretty short on the podcast. So the podcast is not going to be very long. I'm hoping maybe about 10 to 20 minute podcasts every time. And these will be weekly episodic podcasts, probably posted up every Wednesday, I'm hoping. But we'll see. Whenever you see this, it'll probably be the same day every time. So let's draw out one more topic for the day. Let's see what I got here. Massacres of World War II. Everyone can think of some right off the bat. Obviously, what the Germans did to the Jewish citizens. That's one. And it was pretty prevalent. Every land they occupied, they did it in, which was very sad. Especially Poland is probably some of the worst because they've, occupied Poland longer than other places. So Poland had it really bad. Another thing, though, is like, they say that about Germans, but really the Soviets didn't really care for Jewish people either. They didn't really. I'm not going to say they straight up massacred Jewish people, but you look at survival rates from the concentration camps that the Allies found and the concentration camps that the Soviet Union found, and there's a drastic decrease in survival rates in the camps that the Soviet Union found, and that makes you think that maybe the Soviet Union found a bunch of malnutrition people, and instead of helping them, maybe they got rid of some of them. Kind of messed up to think about that, and this is kind of a deep topic, but it's not really talked about a lot. And hopefully this is something that doesn't offend anybody, because I'm just talking about it from a historical standpoint, what kind of happened back then. But yeah, so Germany, Jewish people, Soviet Union, maybe some of the Jewish people. Not going to really go deep into that. Don't want to make anybody mad. And then the other one that really isn't talked about a lot is the Japanese for the Chinese. That's that's brutal. Like that's as bad as what it was for the German one. Like it was really bad. Japan was in China for a lot of years, and they killed a lot of people. Like I bet if we looked up the actual numbers, I mean, it's for sure that Japan killed more Chinese citizens than Germany killed Jewish citizens. And it's a dark topic. Um, Gosh, it's actually so dark that I mean, like I'm on TikTok pretty often, and that's my kind of main social content area, which I've been growing on. And you cannot have like if you post up most things about Japan, it gets flagged pretty quick if it's about World War II. Anything, it doesn't even have to be positive. I can list off like tanks or military equipment or different moments in, or even like a hint of the Japanese imperial flag, and that stuff gets banned real quick. Like it gets taken off. And I'm doing it from a strictly educational point. Most of my videos are educational with some entertainment, music, and stuff like that in the background. Uh, but yeah, it's definitely pretty bad on TikTok on that. Um, Also off topic, but censorship. It's because we're talking about such a dark topic like massacres. I think that today's world, when it comes to censorship, is way too heavy. I'm not, by talking about it, no one is glorifying it or keeping it alive or like keeping it relevant in a positive way. But it is something that happened in the past, and those that do not know the past are doomed to repeat it, and that is a true thing. It's just that we should respect and honor the past and remember it for what it truly was, and not try to make it vanilla or sugarcoat it and things like that. Like I don't believe that a flag should be banned from history textbooks or anything like that, because we should be able to see like how history truly was back then. And as time goes on, even like World War II wasn't that long ago, really, if you look at the span of history. But as time goes on, history changes and evolves depending upon today's society and the victors. And that needs to stop, because we're losing part of our history that we'll never gain back. We can't get these firsthand accounts are slowly going to go away, and eventually we'll no longer be able to get firsthand accounts from World War II people, from veterans. And with that knowledge will be gone. And then we'll only have what we've written down, what we've done videos about, what TV shows we've watched, History Channel, things like that. That's all that's going to be left. So I just hope that the world eventually starts respecting history the way it needs to be, and stops politicizing it into something it's not. So let's draw one more. This is probably going to be my last one, so hopefully it's something I can really sound interesting here, if I can find one. Germany versus Soviet Union Eastern Front. This is a pretty broad one, and actually a really fun one. So when Germany started off, Operation Barbarossa in 1941, and it really kicked off, Germany's goal was to pretty much end the war as quickly as possible. They really thought they could. Now, certain things happened that kind of sabotaged them with this. The first thing would be is that the incompetence of the Italian army. So when Italy couldn't take Greece, Germany had to move crucial forces and supplies down south in the Balkans to fight Greece. Now, this movement costed at least a month to delaying Operation Barbarossa, and that big delay really caused them now to start the war later, and which led to a longer. Oh my goodness, all my notifications going off. It led to a longer, not longer war, but it led to a later start, which led to a longer winter. The winter hit them at a bad time. And I'm not going to say the winter is the reason why they lost, because I mean it's a factor. They just wasn't prepared for a war in Soviet Union. I mean, they needed better clothing. Their equipments need better supply. There's a lot of effort, a lot of things they needed to have a successful campaign. But their high command and their senior mustache man believed that if they used the Blitzkrieg and they used everything they had, they could end the war within a year and they could take it down. Now, that did not happen, obviously, looking back in history. So they pushed in, had great success in the beginning. Battle of Kiev, what was it, 1941, Battle of Kiev, did great. You look at the Battle of Kiev later on, because it happened twice, and it was terrible. Like, they got pushed back. But they made great strides in. The Blitzkrieg really went through a lot of lands, and they took a lot of land fast, and they pushed deep into Soviet Union. Now, the problem with that is the Soviet Union had already developed a doctrine and a tactic perfectly suited to countering the German Blitzkrieg, and that would be the Soviet Deep Battle Doctrine, or Deep Battle Plan. What it was is that the Deep Battle Plan was a multi-layered defensive plan that relied upon counterattacks. It was designed to draw an enemy into its country and eliminate it, and that's exactly how it worked. So when the Germans would launch a Blitzkrieg, the Soviet Union would put lines of defenses in front of this Blitzkrieg, or they already had them there, but they would focus them in front of the Blitzkrieg. So when the German Blitzkrieg would go, it would hit each line of defense and take damage, losses, things like that. So there wouldn't be too many. They wouldn't put a whole bunch on each line. They'd put just enough that they did damage. So the Germans would keep going through. They'd hit the next line, more damage. Next line, more damage. And what this would do is this would slow down the German advance to where the Germans were able to advance, but it slowed it down and they were taking heavy losses and damages. So it would draw them in. At the same time, the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front was doing scorched earth tactics. So that means that they were destroying fields, all food, burning houses. They were doing everything they could to take away all the resources in an area, so that when the Germans captured it, they got nothing. They didn't get anything good out of it. There's no fuel there. There's no nothing for them to take. So that means it's even harder for them to continue on. So, and the other advantage of this is the German Blitzkrieg went. So the front of the Blitzkrieg is fast. Now the back end is slower, and it's a long supply line moving forces forward following the Blitzkrieg. Now that front end would be further ahead than the rest, which would leave these backer elements that are weak to side attacks very vulnerable. So when the advance was slow, it would give the Soviet Union time to counterattack, and they would counterattack from the sides and break into the Blitzkrieg lines involving encirclements. So they would encircle the Blitzkrieg, which the Blitzkrieg was trying to encircle Soviet Union forces. It was honestly a perfect strategy to counter the Blitzkrieg. And just on a tactical and strategic level, I mean, the Germans were kind of at a loss. Also, the German Air Force was lacking. They started taking more losses. Soviets eventually gained air power. And the Blitzkrieg only works with guaranteed air power. So they have to have that. Other things on the Eastern Front, let me think. Number differences. Now, in a straight fight, if Germany fielded the same size army as the Soviet Union, Germany might have won, actually. But with Germans being outnumbered so severely compared to the Soviets, there was no chance and opportunity for the Germans to ever win in the East. The closest they came really is when they got down to Stalingrad and Moscow, and they got really close to winning. There was even talks of Stalin evacuating and maybe setting up a capital on Eastern Soviet Union, but obviously that didn't happen. And they issued certain orders to ensure that wouldn't happen, like not one step back. I think it's Order 226. It might not be 226. There's like two different orders I can think of. But pretty much what it is that you weren't allowed to retreat. If the officer in command saw retreating soldiers, they would shoot them. So you had no choice. You fought or died, either way. Or you just died. If you were going to fight and die, you died. Or if you try to retreat, you died. There was a pretty brutal war. I mean, the Soviet Union really drove their people home on you're going to fight. You are not going to not fight, not going to quit, not going to give up. They were very ruthless. Same thing with the Germans. Germans had their own ruthless side. They told anyone above the rank of major and above, I believe it is, that they could not surrender. They were not allowed to surrender ever. So, I mean, there was a lot of brutalness on both sides. Part of the other reason, like with the Soviet Union, with almost losing, a lot of it came down to supplies. And I know that the U.S. is kind of frowned upon in World War II because people are like, oh man, the Americans talk about how good the U.S. is, and the U.S. is so great, and blah blah blah. Back-to-back WW champs. Everybody's bragging about them. That's not. We brag to a point about World War II because of certain reasons. And if you look at it, like Soviet Union, we supplied them 400,000 trucks. There is no Soviet Union counterattack without our trucks transporting the men, supplies, and food to the front. We supplied like 90% of their motorized industry before the end of the war. Like it was a lot. On top of that, food, we sent them millions of, I was saying millions of tons. It might have been millions of tons. It was a lot of food. We sent them enough food that we supplied, I think, like 40% of their food at one point. I mean, it was a lot. And the Soviet Union was very hungry. Like, there was a point where, like, supplies were low. We kept them very well supplied. So if you really look into it, there's a lot of people that say that if the U.S. did not supply the Soviets with trucks and food, that Germany would have won the Eastern Front. So I always bring that up because I feel like it's very underlooked. We sent supplies through the Arctic seas up north to the Soviet Union, and the German U-boats did attack that, and we lost about 10% of the convoys that went that way. So there's a lot of loss of life that we had just in general supplying other nations, especially to the Soviet Union, because could we have not done that? Yes, but to me it made a huge difference. But if you talk to Russian people today, or a lot of people in Europe, they'll say, oh, the Lend-Lease program from the U.S. didn't really help out that much in World War II, but I completely beg to differ. Well, I guess that about wraps it up. I just want to tell everyone that has listened to this or checked it out on YouTube or checked out my TikTok channel, anything like that. Thank you for listening in to the weekly History Chaos channel. Every week we're going to have more episodes up, and I just want to tell you thank you. My name on all these social media platforms is Dassbear, Dassbear. And again, I want to tell you thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next week.